At some stage in life, many people encounter a strange and unsettling shift they never expected. Activities that once thrilled them, hobbies that used to bring energy and warmth, suddenly feel dull and empty. Music that once stirred their emotions no longer touches them. Food loses its flavor. Time with friends feels strangely hollow. Even the passions they once held closest, reading, walking outdoors, creating, exploring, begin to feel drained of life, as if the color has slowly faded out of everything. Naturally, this frightens people. They assume something is terribly wrong. They wonder if they've fallen into depression, if their brain chemistry has malfunctioned, or if they've become worn out and cynical from the grind of living. With real fear, they ask themselves, what's happening to me? Why can't I feel anything anymore? But what if losing joy isn't a failure at all? What if this strange emotional flatness is not a collapse, but the early stage of a transformation? What if the disappearance of your old joys is clearing space for something deeper, something you can't yet recognize because you're still searching for the old spark? Let me explain. Much of what we normally call happiness or pleasure is actually relief, a brief easing of discomfort. You feel hunger, then you eat, and the pleasure comes from the end of the hunger. You feel lonely, then someone gives you attention, and the warmth you feel is tied directly to the loneliness that came before it. Without the discomfort, the pleasure doesn't have the same intensity. This constant cycle, wanting, fulfilling, wanting again, is what makes ordinary life unstable. It is fueled by a sense that something is missing, that who we are in this moment is somehow not enough. So we chase tiny bursts of relief and label them happiness, even though they are only the pause between discomforts. It's like being hit on the head with a hammer and then feeling grateful when the strikes stop. The real question is, why the hammer at all? For some people, perhaps for you, this whole pattern suddenly becomes visible. You start to notice that the pleasures you depended on were mostly distractions from inner unease. And once you see the mechanism, once you grasp it in your bones, the old pleasures lose their power. The itch and scratch cycle can no longer fool you, because you understand that the itch was created solely to make the scratching feel good. When this realization dawns, the whole structure collapses. The pleasures that used to comfort you fall flat. The distractions lose their shine, and you find yourself in a strange, empty feeling space. It feels like a kind of death, like the world has gone dim, and you've turned into someone moving through life without actually being alive. But this is not the end of anything. It is an in-between stage, a dissolution of the old way of experiencing life before a new way of seeing unfolds. Imagine living your entire life in a room lit only by candles. The candlelight creates shimmering shadows on the walls, and you spend your days fascinated by these shapes. They entertain you, they comfort you, they seem meaningful. Then, one day, a door opens and daylight floods in. At first, the brightness hurts your eyes. The shadows vanish. Everything looks washed out and overly bright. You think, everything I loved has disappeared. Everything looks empty now. But your eyes simply haven't adjusted yet. When they do, you'll realize the daylight reveals a richer, more vivid world than the flickering shadows ever could. This is what you're experiencing. The loss of the shadows, but not yet the clarity of the daylight. You're in the gap between worlds, and this gap can take time. Most people panic and try desperately to revive their old pleasures. New hobbies, new partners, louder music, stronger thrills. They try to force excitement back into their lives like someone adding spicier and spicier seasoning to food they can no longer taste. But this only deepens the problem, because the solution isn't more stimulation, it's stillness. It's the willingness to stop running, stop chasing, and stop trying to fill the quiet with noise. If you allow yourself to simply be, without forcing joy, without demanding excitement, something remarkable begins to appear. A quiet, steady sense of okayness. Not joy in the old sense, not excitement or thrill, but a fundamental feeling that life is acceptable as it is. Complete. Enough. This presence doesn't depend on contrast between good and bad, pleasure and pain. It's constant, like the structure of a house you've been searching through frantically, only to realize the thing you've been looking for is the house itself. Always around you, always supporting you, but unnoticed because you were so busy searching. What you're going through is not a loss. It is an unfolding. The shadows are fading, and though the light is overwhelming now, your vision will adjust. And what you will eventually see is something far more real than anything you've ever called joy before. I need to caution you about something. When I describe this state as a kind of inner okayness, a quiet sense that things are fundamentally fine, you might feel disappointed. You may think, is that it? Just being all right with everything? That sounds boring. And in a way, you're right. It is boring compared to the rush of your old pleasures. It lacks the surge of highs and lows, the wild intensity, the emotional fireworks you used to chase. But here's the part that often goes unnoticed. Excitement drains you. Drama wears you out. The endless search for heightened experiences eventually becomes exhausting. You can't live in a state of constant peak. What ends up happening is a short burst of exhilaration followed by long stretches of dullness as you wait for the next hit. Over time, the lows deepen and the highs require increasingly stronger stimulation. This is the pattern of addiction, and many people are addicted not to substances, but to experiences, to emotional spikes, to the chaos of their own minds. They create problems just so they can fix them. They stir up conflict so they can feel the relief afterward. They mistake agitation for joy. When it seems like nothing brings you joy anymore, what's really collapsing is this addiction to the cycle. And like any addict in withdrawal, you feel awful, flat, numb, lifeless. What you're actually encountering, though, is the absence of agitation. After living wound-tight for so long, stillness feels like death because you've forgotten what real rest feels like. Let me tell you about a man I once knew. He was constantly in motion, traveling, chasing hobbies, devouring books, collecting experiences like trophies. He believed he was making the most of life. Then, slowly, his enthusiasm evaporated. Travel bored him. Books felt mechanical. Food lost its richness. He grew depressed, thinking he had burned out completely. But after lingering in that emptiness for a while, something changed. One day he was simply sitting in his garden, doing nothing, and realized he felt content. Not thrilled, not entertained, just at ease, quietly present. And he saw that all those years of running around had been a way of avoiding exactly this, the simple, unforced experience of being alive. With all the noise stripped away, he finally discovered what he'd been fleeing from. This moment, this breath, this uncomplicated existence. It wasn't dramatic, so his mind had always dismissed it. But it was complete. It was enough. This is what I'm pointing you toward. When the old joys stop working, life is nudging you to uncover a different dimension of experience. Not the roller coaster of pleasure and pain, but something subtler, steadier, more essential. And you cannot force this shift. Trying to achieve it only pulls you further from it. It's like trying to force yourself to fall asleep. The effort itself keeps you awake. You have to stop striving. You have to allow the emptiness. You have to surrender to the not knowing. This is difficult because emptiness terrifies us. We associate it with meaninglessness or death. But real emptiness is potential. It's the open space in which something genuinely new can appear. As long as you're trying to revive old joys or recreate past feelings, nothing fresh can enter. You have to become empty in the way a bowl is empty. Not broken, not lacking. Simply open and ready to be filled with something you cannot yet name. I know this is not what you wanted. You wanted a method to bring joy back, to feel the way you used to. But the truth is, this isn't a problem to fix. It's a transformation. Think of a caterpillar dissolving into mush inside the cocoon. It can't return to being a caterpillar, and it's not yet a butterfly. If that mush could think, it would panic about its own formlessness. You're in that in-between state. And it's not a mistake. It's part of the process. So don't run from it. Don't patch it with fake pleasures. Don't try to force meaning into the void. Stay with what you're experiencing, however flat or colorless it feels. Allow it to be exactly what it is. In time, in its own way and on its own schedule, something will shift. Not back to the old, but into something entirely new. A way of being that doesn't depend on constant stimulation or emotional contrast. One that finds completeness in simply existing. This is what mystics throughout history have hinted at. Not ecstatic bliss or permanent euphoria, but a deep, steady okayness that remains through all states, pleasant or unpleasant. It's an understanding that you are fundamentally all right, not because life is perfect, but because you are whole even in the midst of imperfection. The old joys were attempts to intensify a sunset by adding more colors. The new understanding is realizing the sunset needed nothing. It was already complete, and so are you. So is this moment, even the joyless one. But remember, you cannot make this realization happen. Any attempt to reach it assumes you're incomplete, and that assumption blocks the recognition. It can only arise when effort drops away, quietly, subtly, like an exhale after holding your breath too long. So what do you do while nothing feels joyful? You simply live. You brush your teeth. You eat. You work. Not because these things should make you happy, but because they are what life is presenting now. You observe your state without judgment and without trying to escape it. You notice it the way you'd watch clouds drift across the sky, without insisting they be different. Most importantly, you stop comparing your current self to your past self, your life to others' lives, this moment to imaginary better moments. This isn't resignation. It's showing up fully for life as it is. Paradoxically, only when you stop demanding that things return to how they used to be can something new emerge. Maybe nothing brings you joy anymore because you've outgrown the kind of joy you once knew. Maybe you've become too spacious for those small pleasures. Not because you're superior, but because your awareness has expanded, and the old containers can't hold it anymore. Children delight in candy. Young people crave romance and adventure. Adults seek accomplishment. But eventually, some people see through all of it and recognize its temporary, conditional nature. And then they're left with the raw experience of simply being alive. Compared to the rush of old thrills, it seems like nothing. But actually, it's everything, the foundation of all joy that ever existed. This is not emptiness in the negative sense. It's fullness, wholeness, completion. But it's so ordinary, so gentle, that the mind overlooks it while chasing excitement. What you're being asked to rediscover is the incomparable value of this moment, this breath, this plain and unadorned existence. Not because it gives you pleasure, but because it is real. And what is has always been enough. You just forgot. So when nothing brings you joy anymore, don't assume you're broken. You haven't lost the ability to feel. You've lost your attachment to one particular flavor of feeling. And that loss creates an opening, a doorway into a new way of being. You don't walk through this doorway by effort. You realize you're already standing inside it. The seeking is over. And that is not a loss. That is the beginning of real freedom.